Welcome, everyone. My name is Hrag Vartanian, and I am the editor-in-chief and co-founder of Hyperallergic. And this is the second panel in the forum. And I just want to welcome everyone that's come for the first time, and those who have come back, welcome back. This panel, we're going to be talking about centering and recentering craft in our social lives. And we have a real treat in the fact that all the people that will be presenting today really use craft to either understand how communities come together, how they can think through critical issues using craft itself, as well as people who have done their research and curate different kinds of things around craft. So I think it'll be a really interesting topic, and everyone will be speaking to the various questions we'll be tackling. And I just want to go through some of those questions that we sort of presented as a beginning to this conversation. And that includes what social experiences can we build together in this new space? And of course, I think this also represents what a lot of us have been talking about, which is it feels very much like a new era is beginning. And we're very much, want craft and art and all these other aspects of our lives to evolve and reflect this new kind of reality we're all feeling and seeing. What other areas in craft thinking is craft thinking applicable, and what will we address next, as well as what can we redesign and what curation voice is in all of this. So I'm going to start by just introducing Sarah Schultz, who's the Executive Director of the American Craft Council. So Sarah, take it away.
Great, thanks. Well, let's see, am I on my, sorry, on my video? There I am, hello. Well, thanks, Hrag, and I want to welcome everybody. And I also just want to begin by saying, when we first conceived of this forum series, it was right after COVID hit. And we found ourselves in a moment where we were all used to being physically together, and we realized we all needed to find a way to convene differently and really begin to think about what this moment meant for us and what this moment meant for us as makers, and how as makers we were not only both impacted by it, but how were we being responsive. And I think certainly over the last 3 weeks, it's become clear that we're all really being called on to face a truth, and the truth that we all need to participate in and be accountable for deep systemic change. And I think as we have the conversation today, I think that's certainly something in creating the space. That's part of what we're trying to do, is create the space for how we can both respond to and work together in that. And I think coming together as a craft community is very important, and very important part of the American Craft Council's mission. And I really just want to say, I want to thank not only all the participants, but I really want to thank everybody, all of our partners in this program who have really been not just helping to present, but really being intellectual and creative partners, particularly Hrag and Hyperallergic. As I'm sure you're all familiar, Hyperallergic is one of the leading voices on contemporary art and has always been very near and dear to my heart. And I will just put in a slight pitch that they do remarkable work. And as part of that remarkable work, they've also created a membership program for you to help to join and help support and keep the work going. And I do think in these moments, it's actually important to kind of show up for the things that matter to us. I also really want to thank our other partners, the Socially Engaged Craft Collective, the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, and Critical Craft Forum. And I'm really very honored today to introduce and welcome Namita Gupta-Wiggers, who's the co-founder of Critical Craft Forum, also the director of the MA in Critical Craft Studies at Warren Wilson College. Namita has really been on the forefront of not only of creating a space and literally creating a virtual space for us for quite a while on her Critical Craft Forum. I mean, if you're not part of that conversation on Facebook, I urge you to do that. It has become an even more vibrant and critical part of the conversation now. Namita has also been a great intellectual partner and a great guide for me as well, and for the Craft Council. So with that, I would like to welcome Namita And thank you again for your support of not only this forum, but just the craft community, all you've done for the craft community.
Thank you. Am I on? Everyone can hear me? Great. Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I don't usually read off of notes, but I think that right now is a particularly tough time, and I want to make sure that I get what I wanted to share with everyone out there. So I'm interested in today's program in multiple ways. Some of them are kind of obvious through the work I do at Critical Craft Forum, and also through the work of our students and faculty in the MA in Critical Craft Studies at Warren Wilson College. Critical Craft Forum is a multifaceted, decade-long project, and the most public part of it is the Facebook group, which has nearly 13,000 members right now. Social media, particularly right now, fits into this discussion as one of the most visible public spheres or spaces, particularly as we deal with this pandemic. And this space is perhaps the worst for the way people rely on sound bites and memes and slogans to stand in for actions and communication. So the work on Critical Craft Forum is about pushing people to actually have dialogue in the sense that David Boehm, the physicist, puts forward. This has been particularly challenging in the last 10 days as we are experiencing protests and interest in fighting systemic racism that we have never seen across the globe, not just in the US, but across the globe. And this is only one of the places in which the daily labor of anti-racism work takes place. My second interest in this program today is through the work I do as the director of the MA in Critical Craft Studies at Warren Wilson College. And one of our students, Dara Bowden, has been actively involved in developing today's program. Dara's work is an example of what our program is about working to create a space to unsettle coloniality, to bring intersectional and cultural discourse into view, to understand what craft is, has been, and what craft can be, to expand narratives and pay attention to who is visible in those narratives and who is not. In terms of thinking about this for the future, I think we could do well to look to theater and music industries and the way they are rethinking gatherings and public spaces and what they need to do to adapt under these new health conditions. Fundamentally, the craftscape needs to change. Systemic racism is deeply embedded here. And for me, this work that I do is a daily embodied practice. I look forward to change, and I'm hoping, perhaps naively, that this is the moment in which the statements that are issued by institutions and organizations no longer function as these sort of social uplift edifices, but are actually catalysts for real action and real social change. That's what our students are working towards. That's what they have been preparing for the last 2 years and from before even entering our program. So get ready, because they are ready to work and they are ready to engage with you as we go forward into whatever is coming next. Just the last thing I wanted to share is I think a lot right now about Mr. Rogers. And I know that's a funny thing to say, but I think about how Mr. Rogers said to look for the helpers. And I would actually say right now we should look for the workers, look for the people who are doing the work and find them and figure out how to engage them as we go forward from here. So thank you for engaging Critical Craft Forum in the program, and thank you for inviting my participation.
Great. Thank you, Namita, and thank you, Sarah, for the introductions. So we're going to start, and the format for today's event is there'll be a short video that precedes each speaker, and then each speaker will do a short presentation followed by some questions. And I want to really encourage people to put all their questions in the chat, and I will definitely be taking a look, as well as Rachel will also be helping me to make sure that all your questions will be answered. So we're going to start. The first video is a look at Nahit Mungan, who's a kite maker in Turkey's southeastern province of Mardin, and of course has been affected by the closures of COVID-19. But he continues to work to bring his community together through his craft. So we're going to start with that video.
Benim adım Zahid Mungan. Mardin'de doğup büyüdüm. Mardin'de uçurtma bir gelenektir. Burada herkes damlarına çıkarak uçurtma uçuruyor. Ben de bu uçurtmalar yok olup gitmesin diye buradaki çocuklara uçurtma yapmayı öğretiyorum. Ve aynı zamanda ileri düzeyde uçurtma ile ilgileniyorum. Ülkemi de uçurtma konusunda tüm dünyada uçurtma festivaline katılarak öncülük ediyorum. Koronavirüs bütün dünyayı etkiledi. Ülkemize baharın gelmesiyle birlikte virüs salgını başladı. Eğitim etkinliklerim ve katılacağım uluslararası uçurtma festivalleri hepsi iptal oldu. Ben bugünlerde bütün uçurtmalarımı onardım ve yeni uçurtmalar yaptım. İki uçurtmamdan örnek verecek olursam, bir tanesi yöresel bir kadın uçurtma yaparak her bir kumaşı tek tek kesip dikerek bir uçurtma yapıp ve Mardin semalarında uçurdu. Ve bir tane de örnek verecek olursak, diğer uçurtmam ise evde kal çağrısıyla dünyaya evde kal çağrısı mesajı vererek gökyüzünde uçurtmayla uçurdum. Covid virüs nedeniyle insanlar evden sıkılmıştı. İnsanlar artık cep telefonundan, tabletten ve teknoloji aletlerinden sıkılmıştı. Ben 2002 yılında 120 tane uçurtma gökyüzünde saymıştım. Ama 2002 yılından sonra ilk defa 120 taneden fazla uçurtma gökyüzünde saydım. O da bu Covid virüsünden dolayı. Neden diyeceksiniz? Çünkü insanlar evde sıkıldı ve insanlar özüne döndü. Ben de buradaki atölyemde çocuklara uçurtma yaparak evlerine götürüp hediye ettim. Ve herkes damlara çıkarak uçurtmalarını gökyüzüne uçurdu ve bu konu beni çok mutlu etti. Şehir merkezinde doğup büyüdüğüm evi uçurtma atölyesine çevirdim ve burada birçok uçurtma sergilenmektedir. Çocuklar buraya geldiği zaman önce benim hikayemi dinliyor. Daha sonra sinema salonunda uçurtmanın geçmişini, tarihini öğreniyor. Daha sonra aşamalı bir şekilde uçurtmalarını yapıyor ve uçurtma atölyesinin damında uçurtmalarını uçuruyor. Sadece bunları yapmıyor. Aynı zamanda Uluslararası Uçurtma Festivali'ni organize ediyorum. Burada çocuklara verdiğim eğitim etkinliklerinden sonra uçurtma festivallerine hazırlanıyor. Burada yabancı davet ettiğim uçurtmacı arkadaşlarımı davet ediyorum ve 4 gün süren uçurtma festivali ilk gün damlarda ve daha sonra 3. alanda, büyük alanda hep beraber uçurtmalarımızı uçurup ve turizme büyük bir katkı sağlıyor. Koronavirüs tüm dünyada etkilendiği gibi bizim ülkemiz de etkilendi. Ve burada sanatla uğraşan insanlar artık bir araya gelemez oldu. Daha çok insanlar canlı yayında iletişimlerini sürdürmekle yetindi. Ve burada turizm ciddi anlamda durdu. Ve burada lokantalar, restoranlar ve birçok yer kapalı ve insanlar maddi anlamda oldukça zorluk çekiyor. Mardin'in kültür öğelerinden bir tanesi uçurtmadır. Ve ben Mardin'de yaşayan uçurtma müzesi açmak istiyorum. Burada çocuklar kendi uçurtmalarını yapabilecek ve aynı zamanda gelecek nesillere bu uçurtmalar yok olmasın diye öğretmesi için bu müzeyi açmak istiyor.
Great. Thank you. And so now we have Dara Bowden, who will be speaking about a really interesting kite project, and she's brought her own kite background, which is a nice little feature. She's a quilter, a folklorist, a cultural specialist, I'm sorry, a maker, a ceramicist, a historian, and inaugural graduate of MA in Critical Craft Studies at Warren Wilson College. So Dara, you have the floor.
All right, thank you, Hrag. Thank you, Sarah and Namita, and thank you to Scott and the American Craft Council for having me here. I'm gonna share my screen and get this started here. There we go. So today I'm going to share some of the research that I worked on for my MA in Critical Craft Studies at Warren Wilson College, which is a fantastic graduate program under the direction of Namita Gupta-Wiggers. I'm a kite flyer, and I entered this program knowing that I wanted to study the craft of kites. Kites are handcrafted objects that are designed and used by people all over the world. They are a reflection of locally available materials, socially shared knowledge, and conditions of landscape, wind, and space. And kites carry different meanings in different cultures, but just like we saw in the film from Zahid Mungan in Turkey, I have noticed that local kite flying practices are often advanced by individuals, and knowledge is spread person to person and responds to environmental and social changes. I'm going to tell you about a kite festival that started 50 years ago in Boston, which is where I live. And it brought a whole city together around the craft of making and flying kites. It all started, or the idea started at the Harvard Graduate School of Design in the mid-1960s when architecture students would hold an annual kite design and flying competition on the banks of the Charles River. And staff member and artist Clara Wainwright was inspired by this event to organize a kite competition for the whole city to enjoy. So she gathered a group of architects and designers to form the Committee for the Better Use of Air to help plan a spectacular event that would engage children and adults and as many people as possible in different spaces throughout the city. And the Boston Parks Commissioner enthusiastically supported the festival and suggested that they hold it on the golf course of Franklin Park, which is a vast 485-acre green space in Boston, which encompasses the golf course, woodlands, a pond, a zoo, and multiple playgrounds and fields. So the Committee for the Better Use of Air had architecture colleagues conduct kite making workshops for children across 15 different parks facilities across Boston for free, totally free materials and instruction. And then they organized an exhibition of kites from the collection of Charles and Ray Eames in Boston's brand new City Hall building, which had opened just a few months before. They pulled together a panel of local celebrity judges, which included a star football player from the New England Patriots, curators from the Museum of Fine Arts and the Institute for Contemporary Art. They had the actor who played Bozo the Clown on TV, a skydiver judging the highest flying kite from the air, and a writer from Life magazine went up in a hot air balloon. Other judges were hoisted up in cherry pickers to get a good view of the proceedings. And this is Clara Wainwright, the founder, in a lift bucket there. They handed out dozens of prizes for all kinds of kites. And this slide serves as a reminder of just some of the things happening at the same time that this kite festival was going on. So you can see the front page of the Boston Sunday Globe. The Kite Festival is getting sort of top billing right alongside the dress rehearsal for the moon landing. And the Vietnam War was going on, of course, at this time. And this is also just a little more than 1 year following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and almost a year since the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. Franklin Park itself is bordered by predominantly Black neighborhoods, which were impacted by redlining and other forms of systemic racism. And in 1969, Black families in Boston were already engaged in a struggle to secure equal educational resources for their children through the desegregation of Boston public schools. And the annual Kite Festival continued well into the period known as the Boston busing crisis, which started in 1974, when mostly white families rioted and campaigned against busing and desegregation of the public schools. So what can this event teach us about a social experience we might organize around craft in this moment? I want to be clear that this Kite Festival is did not solve Boston's problems with institutional racism, but it did become an annual opportunity for collective joy. And Boston still has an annual Kite Festival in May. It's held on a smaller field within Franklin Park, and it's called the Kite and Bike Festival. And last May, I met families who have been attending this festival for 3 generations, and many people said it was their favorite day of the year. And kite flyers like me don't need to be part of a festival to transform public space into a spectacular aerial craft exhibition. And one of the things that excites me about kites as a craft is that there are virtually no economic barriers to making and using them. And their potential as a form of expression and connection feels limitless. In recent months during the COVID-19 shutdown, I got out to fly kites just a handful of times on a basically deserted beach near here. And I've never had anyone question my right to fly kites in a public space, even during the pandemic. But the murder of Ahmaud Arbery while jogging and the threat made to Christian Cooper's life while birdwatching in Central Park, and now the demonstrations in the streets against police brutality and for Black Lives Matter have led me to reflect on what it means to use public space as a white body. And although kite making and kite flying outdoors is technically free, it really should be something that's equally carefree for all. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Dara, I appreciate that. You know, one of the things during our conversation and preparing for this that I think really helped illuminate how important this was the fact that you had mentioned that kite flying was actually banned in Central Park until 1968. And which gives a little context. So what was it? Was it across the country there was sort of a new interest in kite flying generally? How would you characterize it?
Well, and it seems like the 1960s, mid-1960s, there was like a huge sort of resurgence of interest in kite flying. I mean, certainly people were doing it before then, but that is when you start to see groups forming around kite flying, like the American Kite Flyers Association was founded in, I think, 1964, 65, right around in there. And you start to see kite festivals specifically starting. I know there was one that started in Maryland in 1967. And so yeah, there was definitely like a growing interest in kites and kite flying as sort of this social activity that people were forming organizations around and formalizing in that way. Yeah.
And then one of the things, obviously, when we're talking about these sort of social projects, funding is always in a question about something like this. Now, how was a project like this funded, and how were they able to sustain it for so long?
Yeah, so the Great Boston Kite Festival was specifically the founder, Clara Wainwright. Actually, she told me she had a connection at the Boston Globe, and she went there, and they said, "Oh, we'll fund the whole thing for you. You know, you just need $6,000. We'll write you a check." But she said no. She wanted to, very specifically wanted to sort of gather sponsorships from many different organizations. So she very deliberately kind of distributed funding in smaller pieces from many different organizations. I think partly to sort of avoid, you know, having one organization sort of claim it as their own. So it was really this multi-institution kind of event that gathered a lot of support from a lot of different places around the city.
And what were some of the biggest surprises in your research in general? Because, you know, it sounds like an incredibly fascinating project, but, you know, and I mean, but there seems to be so many moving parts to it.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. What are the most surprising things? I don't know. One of the great surprising things is just I have been finding where do I find these resources or the archival materials? They just sort of keep bubbling to the surface. When I started this, I felt like I wasn't seeing a lot of things written about kites. I mean, there's a few sort of niche publications that are devoted to kites, but you don't see a lot sort of generally written about them. And that's why I wanted to pursue this project. So one of the great pleasures was finding little troves of archival material here and there. So, and even since, you know, I sort of completed my thesis, but even in the weeks since, I'll find, oh, here's another archive at MIT where I found a bunch of new photos that I'd never seen before, or somebody uploads their collection of photos from the 60s to Flickr, and suddenly I'm seeing new documentation that I'd never seen before. So I think that's been one of the great things specifically about this Kite Festival and researching that. And also just finding the breadth of kite activity that has happened local to me. And that was something I wanted to sort of base my project in my local region and see what has happened here. Because kite flying in every different place, and we just saw in Turkey, you know, people are flying from their rooftops, and that's not how people fly kites here in Boston, because we don't have so many flat roofs, or I don't know if there's other reasons for that, but I think that's a really interesting part of it.
And Diana NG, who's our next speaker, had mentioned that the influx of immigrants from the Caribbean and other places where kite flying is much more popular, or at the time, probably had a huge impact on that. So I just want to sort of note that. And also there's a question from Fabio about the fact that to what ends did the Harvard's Graduate School of Design utilize kites and kite making? So what was their interest in this?
That's a great question. Thank you, Fabio. I think, so I know that this annual kite flight, which took several different names, I saw it in the sort of documentation, and I think it was for a few years in the mid-1960s. I don't think that it necessarily continued for more than 5 years or so. And my understanding is it happened mostly when Benjamin Thompson was the director of the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And my understanding, it was like a one-day festival or one-day event. I don't know that they necessarily did things with it beyond that period. But that's something, you know, when I started this project, I thought, oh, I'm going to find a connection there between that sort of kite event and then other sort of design education based kite events that I found out about. So I know Haystack Mountain School of Crafts had kite days in the 1960s as well. And I know the Bauhaus had kite Drachenfests in 1920, early 1920s. And so these were annual events at these places. They seemed to last for a few years, but I didn't find evidence that they necessarily were like a, you know, going on for decades. So interesting question. Oh, you're muted.
Yep. Thank you so much. So we're going to continue on to the next video. Dara, thank you so much for the presentation. And I'm sure people have questions afterwards. So the next video we're going to be watching is Women of Color Quilters Network, a film that talks about more than 1,000 women of color in this community, largely from the South, who are mostly over the age of 65 with little access to technology. One could not think of a more vulnerable community for a global pandemic to possibly hit. The Quilt Network lost several members actually to COVID-19 this year, and co-founder Carolyn Maslomi speaks to ways this community stood up to support to take on the pandemic. So we're going to watch that now.
Hello, my name is Carolyn Maslomi, and I'm the director and founder of the Women of Color Quilters Network. The Women of Color Quilters Network is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1985 to educate, preserve, present, promote, and sell African American made quilts. We have over 700 members scattered across 42 states. I have to say that COVID-19 has really affected the Women of Color Quilters Network in ways we never thought we'd see. Over the years, over the last 37 years, we presented quilts at exhibitions, not only in this country, but internationally. Since this pandemic, we've made collectively over 21,000 masks in the last 1.5 months. Those masks have been distributed to PPEs, to churches, to funeral homes, to businesses, to our friends and family. And throughout this, we've had 7 network members that have died as a result of COVID-19. I myself have had a member in my family die from COVID-19. Making the mask has been a call to service. We felt, many of us, that we had to do something. We had to give back. We had to help, because we saw so many African Americans across the United States were being disproportionately affected by this virus. Although we were just 13% of the population, in some states we were almost 40% and over of those that are dying from this virus. So to do something to help really was, for us, a clarion call. So we started making masks. We have members that have made I call them utilitarian masks. And I especially think about Dorothy Burge, a member in Chicago, who decided to make masks for the youth in her community because she saw that the African American kids in her community were not wearing masks. And it was so important, since we're being disproportionately affected, she thought it important that they wear masks. So she made them and set about educating them on the importance of protecting themselves against this virus. At the same time, we have some artists that have taken a leap from the utilitarian mask into making masks as art. In particular, I'm thinking about the artist Carolyn Crump from Houston, Texas, that makes art masks. And she's making these masks to supplement her income, because a lot of her income has been lost. She makes quilts and quilt-related items for museum shops across the country. One of the things that has happened since this pandemic, instead of the traditional way of doing these exhibits and selling at gift shops, so we're taking this network in another direction insofar as marketing, which is a totally new experience for us, and it's thrown us a learning curve. So we're in the process of learning how to take care of this new business. In some sense, the COVID-19 pandemic has been quite devastating. And in another sense, it's increased our awareness about marketing and other tools in which to help sustain ourselves. So that's an awakening for us. The creation of artwork by members of the network, artwork that deals with the victims, the families, the support teams, the medical staff. Those stories are being utilized, and then they inspire quilts. So I'm interested as a historian and a writer to see what's the result of the network members telling these stories. We are known for our quilts, in particularly narrative or story quilts. Most of the shows that we do, most of the quilts that we produce deal with stories. So I want to see how this story is going to play out in the artwork that's created by the network. I'm interested to see what's going to be visually written in this new chapter in our history here in America dealing with this pandemic and the lives that it has touched, the lives that have been taken from us, and the quilts that will celebrate those people that have left. So I'm waiting to see what these memories bring as we, the Women of Color Quilters Network, use needle and thread to tell our stories and to tell the story of our people, tell the story of our nation and the results of this pandemic.
It was a wonderful video, and I'm so glad it touched on the realities that many of our lives are being impacted by COVID, and our families are being impacted. So I want to introduce Dr. Diana Beard-Ng, who is a quilter, folklorist, cultural specialist, and curator at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. You have the floor.
Unmute. Thank you. I think that it's so important when we think about you know, how craft can address some of the issues that are central to what's going on right now. I love what Carolyn Mazlumi said about using needle and thread to tell our stories, and I think that telling our own stories is really essential to making sure that the story is told from a perspective that's important. There's a proverb that says that the tale, I'm saying it in a different way, but the tale told by the lion about an event is very different from the tale told by the hunter. So I think that central to this issue is how craft can help us to tell our own stories. I'm going to talk for maybe 3 minutes about some of the projects that that I've been involved with the Smithsonian, and then talk a little bit about my own work. So I'm going to try to share the screen, and but before I do, these are really incredible times, and I do have to talk about those martyrs who have, some of those martyrs that have given their lives in police violence, that have, and to remember what they did, from George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tamir Rice, Deion Johnson, Sarah Bland, Emmett Till. These are, you know, we have to keep on saying their names and recognizing that their lives matters, and that Black Lives Matter. So I'm going to share my screen now. Oh goodness. I'm going to ask.
Sorry, at the bottom of the screen, you have the green button to share screen, and then to select your desktop and click OK.
Okay. I'm going to put this up here. Okay. So one of the stories that we tell visually is through African American dress. Can you see?
No, we are not yet seeing your screen.
Okay. Shoot. You might have to
I can pull up the PowerPoint for you and share it on my screen.
Great. That would be wonderful.
Give me
Thank you.
just a moment here, please. Are you able to see the PowerPoint now?
I'm not, but I hope everyone else is.
I can, yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Okay.
And Diana, if you just want to give me cues for when to advance the slides, I'll take care of that for you.
Sure. The work that I'm doing at Smithsonian for about 10 years now has to do with African American identity, style, and the aesthetics of diversity, of African American diversity, and recognizing that that dress is an art form, dress is a craft with its own aesthetic and its own meanings, and that through African American dress, including hair braiding, including and hair styling, we tell stories and we resist, and that is a very important part. And telling those stories, which you know, we've called in the project sartorial autobiographies, that's a very important part of craft thinking. The second, because we are all connected globally, the second project that is a new project is we started the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, but some of the questions that we're asking are very relevant to the discussion today. You know, what's the role of community-based cultural heritage enterprise in building cultural vitality and sustainability? And what are the conditions under which they can serve for community resilience? COVID-19 has created a economic crisis, and one of the ways that we look in an economic crisis, many people, many craft people are looking to new ways to create income, and especially in the African American community, it makes a difference. If barbering and hairdressing is a craft form, you know, what happens there when that's not possible? 3, how are skills and knowledge transmitted from generation to generation, and how does this in turn, how does this process of transmission strengthen intergenerational bonds? All of these are very relevant to domestic scene as well. 4, what opportunities do community-based cultural heritage enterprises offer for people, both within and outside of a local culture, to identify, appreciate, and value their own history, know-how, and local aesthetics? So these are all questions that are both global, and especially in regard to people of African descent, and also they're very local. So the project that I wanted to talk about is something that I've been thinking about for the past few years, and it's a form that that combines quilting and quilting, needlework, and the opportunity to create new spaces. So this is the mending blind, and the hunting blind. A hunting blind is a it's
Anna,
a. Can you hear me?
I can hear
Oh, I'm
you.
sorry. I went to 5, and then 6, and then 7.
Okay, can you advise if I'm on the correct slide
Yeah,
here?
so 5, and then that is the mending blind. 6, a definition of a hunting blind, a small portable structure covered with images of foliage to disguise the presence of hunters by blending with their surroundings, used by hunters to kill, to do violence to their prey. And then 7, a little bit more about that. This is an example of a hunting blind. And then 8, so hunters, I came across this, and I'm not from a family or a social group that hunts, and they put up these structures in the forest, and ironically, they're covered with image of living things, of plants and foliage to disguise their presence, and the interiors are really kind of beautiful, and womb-like, and they're constructed to be portable, to erect quickly. And in craft thinking, what we talk about is transforming spaces to look at new kinds of things. So 8. So the idea here was to look at, how we can use what we do to contribute to new realities, new ways of doing things. So 9, and hunter's blind has a really interesting definition. It's something to hinder or keep out light, a plate of concealment, concealing enclosure from which one may shoot game or observe wildlife, something put forward for the purpose of misleading, and we've had a lot of that in subterfuge, or a person who acts as a decoy or distraction, sightless. I think that in many ways what we're talking about in the crisis facing us with institutionalized racism is blindness. So in the ordinary speech, in the ordinary use of the word, blindness can be that. And certainly 10, in the case of what we've seen recently, the African American community has been the victim of hunting blinds, and what I call fast kill and slow kill. Fast kill, dating back to the days of slavery and colonization, people of color have been hunted rather than hunters, and we all are becoming aware of the history of kidnappings, capture, imprisonment, gun violence that began with slavery and that continues today. But there's also slow kill, 11. And slow kill are those things to which we don't, or it's not easy to see every day, but it's happening every day. And that food deserts, food insecurity, the stresses, of living in a racist society, all of these things here may augment the rates of environmentally triggered allergies, asthma, diabetes, and now PTSD-related suicides, and now COVID-19, which are all much, much higher among African Americans. And so there's fast kill, 10, slide 10, and slow kill. And so there may not be a physical hunter's blind, but certainly this has been the condition in which people have found themselves. 12. So what do we need to do to mend? That's 12. And to mend, to restore to health, to patch up, to repair, to set right, to correct. An amend can also be a mended place. And this is why the mending blind came into being, 13. So the idea of the mending blind is that rather than use this structure as an accessory to killing, it offers shelter and sanctuary. It holds space for healing and mending both socks and soles, tears and textiles and relationship. The blind transformed as a space for meditation, contemplation, or intimate conversation. And it's the both metaphorically and actually a place that we can start having those important conversations. 14.
So Diana, because we're a little limited in time, if there are some other images you wanted to show, we can just see if there are any questions, because I think you've done a really good job of introducing the complexity of an object like this and where it comes from. But could you also talk a little bit about some of the techniques and the different kinds of techniques you're using in the mending?
Sure, and if you could just go through the rest of the 16, the mending is not only, you know, those things that our grandparents did to mend our clothes, darning techniques and running stitches and so on, but also the stitches that are used in quilting, the applique, lace making, the ways that we transform our spaces. And so those are things that we're using. If you could switch 20, slide 20, those things are,
My audio broke up for just a second. Can you please say the slide number again?
okay, 20. And then finally 21. And some of these things have come back into, as most of us have been in our homes, some of these skills have come back into use to make masks for our family, our friends, and for hospitals and the people who need it right now. So that's 21. So again, it's repurposing the very simple needle and thread to new purposes.
Great. It's I'm so glad you presented on the mending the blind, because I think it really does capture so many things, as well as making a sort of something that traditionally is supposed to disappear and making it very visible, but not only making it visible, making it safe. And I think there's a really beauty to that, Diana. So thank you so much for that. So I just want to ask, you know, if anybody has any questions, we might have a few minutes at the end, so we'll keep them for that. So if it's all right with you, Diana, we'll continue on to the next speaker.
Sure, thanks.
Great, thank you. So next we're going to be seeing a film, a short video by Aram Han Cifuentes, talking about the different, Aram Han Cifuentes is talking about the global pandemic spread, closing studio practices, halting makers' economies, and affecting the supply chain, which I'm sure is something that everyone is being impacted by. So they're a social practice artist, and they use this time to retreat and prepare for the next potential crisis, which in her perspective is the 2020 election. And then the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis happened. So this short takes a look at how she has been using craft thinking to produce two bodies of work: voting kits for the disenfranchised, a toolkit for artists, activists, educators, students, and others to produce imaginative voting stations that will bring attention to voting barriers or restrictions in the US, as well as to revisit the protest banner lending library, which I really love. So we're gonna watch that now.
I'm Aram Han Cifuentes. I'm a fiber social practice artist. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So for the last 2 years, I've been working on a project called the Official Unofficial Voting Stations, Voting for All Who Legally Can't. The first iteration of the project happened in 2016, where I collaborated with more than 15 artists, and we created more than 25 different voting stations. These imaginative voting stations that took place in cities all over the US and in Mexico. I was really excited to create these kits that would just go out into the world and spark these imaginative voting stations all over. But with COVID happening, and it seems like, you know, large gatherings will be difficult to have in the fall. It's hard to do social practice when you have to maintain social distancing, right? And so I really spent this time to rethink the project, and I have been recently started a new collaboration with new media artist John Satram, and we've been sort of reimagining and thinking of what a digital voting platform can look like, right? And so we've been working on that, and I'm excited for that. And we're working on creating a part of this digital platform to have these objects, but make them downloadable. And I've been working with artist William Estrada, who's an amazing artist and arts educator. And we've been working together to create curriculum for youth with art and lessons around to talk about voting. The focus of what I was working on in the studio shifted, right? I've always been making work about social and racial justice. In 2016, I started a project called the Protest Banner Lending Library. In workshops, I teach people how to make their own protest banners, and I have a physical lending library of them. They're in different cities all over the US, but the main library is in Chicago. I have more than 400 banners currently in the library. So with protests erupting, people have been reaching out nonstop. During this pandemic and during these protests, I think that particularly with fiber and with textiles, you know, it's been so important to make PPE masks because it was such a shortage to make these at home. And I was making them too with remnants I have laying around from purchase banners. And, you know, it was like so necessary for us to be making these masks and distributing them. As an immigrant, as a woman of color, you know, as somebody who's dedicated to working with disenfranchised, non-citizen immigrants of color, you know, under the Trump administration, it has been terrible, right? It is so clear that our lives are not valued. And I use this statement time and time again in my practice, and it's a system cannot protect those it was never designed to protect. And I believe that to my core, right? However, I'm energized, I'm excited about this moment because we're having this conversation.
So we're going to try to jump right in since we're, you know, we're getting close to the end of the program and the time, of course, is limited. So I'm going to invite Andreas Payan Estrada, who's a visual artist and curator of public engagement at Craft Contemporary, to talk a little bit about their work curating. Andreas?
Hey, can y'all hear me, see me?
Yes, we can.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much. So, hi everyone. Thank you all so much for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a bit about craft and curation and speculating a bit about the future of the field, and particularly thinking about everything that has been happening in our society. As Hrag mentioned, my name is Andres Payan Estrada. I'm an artist. I am curator of public engagement at Craft Contemporary, and I've also been visiting faculty at the California Institute of the Arts for the past 2.5 years. And so let me go ahead and share some slides with you all. Great. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So yes, I was asked to talk a bit about my work and thoughts on how to design or redesign curation to build a more equitable and inclusive society. And this is a really big conversation. It's also a difficult conversation, but it's also and one has to acknowledge that it's also a conversation that has been happening, and a lot of people that I see in this Zoom have been working very hard to create these spaces for people of color to be able to be welcome and be able to work in institutions, and I thank you all for that. Now, to give a little bit of context, when I think about craft, I think a lot about my experience growing up between the United States and Mexico. I would cross the border daily in order to go to school, and in the process I would walk through dozens of these shops selling anything from velvet paintings, Mexican Talavera ceramics, cheap electrical toys, and popular cartoon figures. It was a very eclectic parade of imagery and objects, and to me the foundation of how these things were constructed revealed a very complex reality of the geographies and the histories and the people that make up these spaces, and set the tone for how I think about craft in terms of access and understandability and in relation to different narratives and different histories. I think a lot about these experiences, and I thought about them when I was curating an exhibition for the Arizona State University Museum, which is still currently on view, and was also exhibited at the Stanley and Gerald Rubin Center in El Paso, Texas. The title of the exhibition was Total Collapse, Clay in the Contemporary Past, and it was a group exhibition of artists working with clay and who are using clay to investigate our relation to consumption, technology, and history making. And I want to briefly talk about two artists in the exhibition that present two topics that need to be acknowledged and addressed today as we kind of all move forward to creating spaces that not only include people of color, but are also receptive to the infrastructure that you're bringing these people of color into. And they're also actively working towards creating spaces and environments that are non-racist, exclusionary, and that are safe for these communities. One of the artists is Galaporis Kim, who was born in Bogota, Colombia, and currently lives and works in Los Angeles. And the work in the exhibition are these ceramic objects that are handmade out of clay, and then a few of them have GPS trackers attached to them as a gesture, which makes it possible to track these pieces at any given moment or time and see where they have been. And I'm really interested in Gala's practice because it has a very deep understanding and challenges art institutions and collections and exhibitions and how these histories are told and how, and also by who. So these are things for us to kind of like start thinking and considering. With these pieces, she was working with a collection in the Los Angeles County Museum of Art under the name of the Proctor Stedford Ceramics Collection. And what the artist has been working on is trying to reclaim some of the histories of these artifacts and some of the knowledge of where these came from and who made these and what communities these objects were part of. And what you see here are these forms that she's recreated alongside emails that are conversation where she's actively has been working to change the name of the collection so it represents the community and the histories that the collection actually holds. And I think this is a very important proposition that is being made by the artist, which is to analyze the entire structure of an institution and even the power dynamics that are inherent within these institutions, because you can't really start thinking about bringing a community and people of color into an institution that perhaps wasn't designed to feel them or make them be welcome. Or that they don't belong. And you have to acknowledge that entire infrastructure and the role that the museum has as a cultural steward and also moving towards embodying an idea of a more inclusive space. The other artist that I would like to talk about is Khalil Robert Irving, who was born in San Diego, California and works in St. Louis, Missouri. And his work, as you can see right here, is a conglomeration of different ceramic objects and clays and glazes and decals. And they very much so reference a pile of trash or trace, perhaps of a riot, or the trash that has been accumulating in neighborhoods and cities that don't serve their communities of color. And there's also an acknowledgement of the history of the decorative object that's inherent within these, and how the porcelain sculpture often became a signifier of affluence and wealth within the decorative arts movement. And one thing that I'm really interested in this, and that it also challenges the dominant discourse around white-centric focus in craft histories. And it sort of tries to break from that and build something anew while using it in order to represent the struggle and the life of Black community. In the decals, you see anywhere from decorative motifs to fried chicken as a surface to headlines of Black bodies being murdered around the United States. And we have to be critical of the dominant histories and acknowledge sometimes that these dominant histories and dominant discourses that some institutions form and guide oftentimes might not be acknowledging people of color. And the people of color might not see themselves represented in these narratives because maybe their narratives have deeper histories in craft. than the ones that we often acknowledge. To a person of color, perhaps the arts and craft movement is just a reminder that the dominant academic discourse has been created by white males. Or the American craft studio movement can be a reminder of the education inequality in the United States, as the GI Bill did not serve communities of color because they couldn't afford to go to school, or they were turned away of universities, or they ended up in colleges that were underfunded and over capacity. And I'm hoping some of these topics and some of this conversation kind of gives people things to think about and question ourselves and how we're creating opportunities, not only to diversify, because diversifying is really a corporate strategy, but how are we creating equitable and safe spaces to hire curators of color, create spaces that amplify and not use the voices of people of color, and also spaces that are openly analyzing the work that they're doing to dismantle the roadblocks that perhaps are gatekeeping or creating challenges that the institutions are placing that are not allowing you to reach communities of color. And lastly, to consider that there are incredible thinkers out there that have not been given the opportunity, that higher and formal education and extended work experience might not always be accessible to people of color, and that sometimes the dominant discourse and the histories that we propel are oftentimes not histories that include these communities.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you so much, Andreas. I'm curious, out of all because you're absolutely right, in my experience, a lot of these histories are being written now or finally being recorded, or sometimes they're just being elevated and they're already known within their own communities. What are some of those histories that you're most interested in right now that are starting to emerge into the quote unquote mainstream?
You know, I think a lot of those histories, I mean, because there's the multiple mainstreams too. There's like the mainstream within sort of the discourse of contemporary craft, and there's also perhaps the mainstream within a broader art world. And to me, some of the things that are interesting, that are arising are practices and thoughts that are building on these foundations of craft, but they're also digging deeper into deeper histories of craft, into the histories of their communities, of where they came from, who they are, indigenous knowledge and indigenous forms of making, which I think are integral to where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone has any questions, because we're going to be, unfortunately, some of the talks, the videos and other things, they've been a little longer than we originally planned for. So I'd like people to put their questions in as quickly as possible, so I can start organizing that and bring in other people that have questions around that. So now, are there any things you would recommend people working with craft makers who do work with histories that are often not centered in museums? Is there something you'd recommend curators or other types of people that work with that material that they consider that they might not be thinking of?
I mean, a good place to start would be, everybody is always continuously educating themselves about things that are outside of kind of like the dominant thought that they have. I would sort of acknowledge that you have to build these communities in order to work with these communities, that in order to diversify your exhibition or diversify your staff, it's not just a checklist. You actually have to make the work in order to create these spaces for these voices to be heard.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for Andreas or Diana or Dara? I just want to get those in because we're almost at time, and I want to introduce the last speaker, which is Sarah Khan, who's an American Craft Council board trustee, shortly. But before that happens, one last question for you, Andreas. Now, out of those, what are some of the other challenges that you're facing when you're showing these, in terms of like, even in the way institutions choose to frame or the way they choose to promote events? Is there a way that you would suggest sort of looking at the material in a way that's sensitive to the makers themselves?
I mean, I think a lot of it sort of, it requires more of a collaboration with the maker. and more of a conversation with the artist and the maker in order to acknowledge what is the full breadth of what they're thinking about, and sort of propelling and projecting their conversation. Because kind of at the end of the day, the conversation that these artists are having might eventually be sort of like more direct links and connections to communities and to people that you would want for your spaces to welcome.
Right. So now there is a general question. It's for Namita and all the panelists. It says it's how we as infrastructures relying, what is the social media supports financially? I'm sorry, I don't quite fully. So if you'd like to sort of elaborate on that, I'd be happy to ask that question. But Namita, I don't know if Namita wants to chime in at this point, but she's answering the questions in the chat room, just so that if anybody's interested to chime in there. So I'm gonna invite Sarah Khan. Thank you so much, Andreas, for the presentation. It really gave a lot of people a lot to think about, particularly in the way histories and different histories are being dealt with in institutional settings. So Sarah, you have the floor if you'd like to give some of the closing remarks for today. Perhaps she's not here.
Hrag, I'm looking for her in the chat. I think she may have joined and exited, so I need to make her a co-host. Please stand by just 1 minute.
No problem. So, if there is, there's another question from Carolyn about how can we get the gatekeepers, people who are in positions of power, to see what we're saying? That's a really good question. So maybe we'll think about that. And Sarah, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can now.
Okay. Well, first, I just want to introduce myself. I'm a trustee of the American Craft Council, and a maker and a scholar, and have not been formally trained in an art school. And I think that's one of my strengths and one of my weaknesses. But what I want to do is reflect more on the richness that was just offered to us today. And I kind of just want to reflect back to what I heard in the words that ACC has created an environment and a platform so we can have these discussions. Hrag, for your skilled co-founder of Hyperallergic, but also the way in which you are managing and introducing everybody and engaging in conversation. And then every single person who presented, Sarah Schultz, Namita, Zahid, Diana, Carolyn Mazlumi, Aram, Andres, there's so many words that are washing over me, and it's just a few minutes I have with you, so there's not going to be anything more profound than reflecting back the richness that you just provided and the layeredness you just provided, and by doing that, giving us permission to also be layered, to share our full selves, and to fly freer than the kites, to break soil, to sow, S-E-W, and to sow, S-O-W, but to be cognizant of blindness, who's hunted and who isn't in public and private places, the slow kill and the slow violence that environmental racism, systemic racism destroys so slowly that no one can point a finger, and that's what makes it more insidious. But I think about the needles and the threads and the pricking and the breaking of ground to grow, the shaping and the molding of clay to create and direct, and look into the future and shape a different kind of reality than the one that many of us are facing today. Many of us are traumatized by today, by what's happening with the pandemic, by what's happening with our Black and brown brothers and sisters who are being murdered in the streets. But I will say very emphatically that this is not new to a large majority of the world. It's just newer to people with more agency. Not to diminish anybody's feelings, but moving forward, what is our responsibility to not engage in a performative type of allyship, but a real type of allyship. And so how are we going to sow, SEW? How are we going to sow, SOW? What are we going to do individually, institutionally to dismantle and continually reach towards a more inclusive democracy for all? That's all I really have to say is, what is our role? What are we doing? Thank you for your layeredness. Thank you for offering it, because when you do it, it gives me permission to do it. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you everyone for joining us. I just want to remind you the next session will be on Friday, June the 26th, and the topic is Design Solutions for an Equitable and Sustainable Craft Economy. And I think that's an incredibly important topic, and I hope everybody and their loved ones are safe and healthy during this very difficult period. And thank you so much for joining us again, and thank you to the American Craft Council and all the people behind the scenes, including Rachel, who's been doing an expert job of fielding all the questions, as well as Jason and as the tech guru for the day. Thanks again.